What I did notice, though, that I was being followed outside my house. There were cars watching my home, and I would check with our community policing forum because we all have one another's numbers. Is this a car that belongs to the community? And the community was saying, we don't know it. In my street, we all know one another's vehicles, and no one knew it. And so we started taking photos of these vehicles. And I would also just leave the house. The minute I saw a strange car, I would just drive away.
Hello, my name is Donald, and welcome to the #1 media company, WorldView. At WorldView, we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our worldview. Today, we're talking with Cynthia Stimpel. Cynthia is the former group treasurer at SAA and the co-founder of Citizens of Conscience Foundation. She is the author of Hijackers on Board, how one courageous whistleblower fought against the capture of SAA. Cynthia, welcome. It's a great honor to speak to you.
Thank you for having me on your show, Donald. Yes, I'm very honored to be here. Thank you.
So Cynthia, I know in your book, you use the phrase, it's our time to eat. Where does this phrase come from? Who is our in this case, and what will they be eating?
So the first time I actually heard that word, it's our time to eat, I'd read it in a book by Michaela Wrong, who wrote about a Kenyan whistleblower called John Chitango. And her title was, It's Our Time to Eat. But when I heard it in our boardroom at SAA, was a meeting called by our chairperson, Is Dudu Myeni, where we were a group of senior managers who were working to turn the organization around. And we were working very closely with National Treasury. And in this meeting, she stopped us from attending the weekly sessions, the meetings, and told us we can only attend monthly. And then she mentioned the sentence of, it's our time to eat. My assumption at the time for the owl was probably them as board directors of SAA and possibly the rest of government who was in charge, that it's their time to eat. So yes, so to eat, I guess for me was obviously taking funds where you could take funds. So it was part of the whole corruption and the ongoing widespread of our state capture that we've seen across our country. Thank you.
But did she just blur it out? How did she just say it?
It was said very casually. It's like you and I having this conversation and just saying, well, it's our time to eat. So we must do things the way we want to do it. It's not following the procedures or policies according to National Treasury, but let us do our own thing. And it was said very casually as if it's a normal thing to do.
Okay, so can you tell us about this character, Dudu Myeni? What was your experience of her like?
Okay, so Ms. Myeni came into SAA as a board member during the time when we had another chairperson called Cheryl Carolus, and we had various other strong board members. Roughly the number of board members at the time was over 16, and very powerful as in their own right. They were strong business people with very good business acumen and experience behind their names. There was a time when a new minister, Mmusi Gigaba, came into South to take over the Department of Public Enterprises. And our board, the current board, then were challenged by what this new minister, Gigaba, was asking them to do. And they were seeking funding, firstly, and equity to rectify SA's balance sheet. But he, in turn, was trying to get them to make decisions around closing routes, like the route to Mumbai, and saying SA doesn't need the funding right now, and various other things. And they obviously clashed because they felt that this wasn't what the focus was as their role of directors of SAA, and they walked away. Ms. Myeni was there, and in articles that I had read was written by Richard Lauch, at the time was also director, had stated that while she was a director, she hardly pitched for meetings. And suddenly, when this board walks out en masse, it was firstly 8 directors and then a few more resigned thereafter. Ms. Myeni stayed on, and she became the chairperson. And the citing was that she has background experience of SAA, and that's how she got the chairmanship of SAA. So my personal experience with her, though, was we were sitting in, we called it a top 100, where senior managers meet together, and we're normally discussing strategy and where we are as SA, and are we meeting our strategy and our focus that we had set out on our timelines and our monetary revenue. And it was in this meeting where she stated to us that there are so many problems at SAA, and there's only supposed to be 4 major board meetings, but she's had 16 already, and she hasn't got enough outfits to wear. And that was a statement that stuck with me, because I thought, who speaks like that? You know, anyway, so that was my first impression. The others were, she's actually quite an attractive woman. She dresses very smartly in traditional wear, and is soft-spoken, you know, but has a snide way about her. The next time we met was then with us, when we had to fly down to Cape Town for a meeting with Parliament, and she was supposed to be present with us. She had a briefing just before our parliamentary meeting, and then stated she couldn't come because she had other commitments, and we didn't see her again. And then my third interaction with her was when she called us for this meeting. It's our time to eat. So, but obviously I've read a lot about her in the media, and I found that she's always, issues that came out, was always trying to either run SAA down as its managers, its pilots, and the people making the decisions, and always bringing in conflict. When she was there was far more conflict around racism than before. It was never mentioned then, maybe there was, or it was covert, but people always had a sense of pride working for SAA, and they really loved SAA. And suddenly we started getting this division of racism. And so I think she brought in division into the organization.
I know, well, everyone almost knows that she has a connection with the former president, Jacob Zuma. Do you know what is that connection? Why do they know each other so well?
Well, they have a son together. Their son is Talente Myeni. And yes, she has very close relations with him. And in many meetings, they are seen together. So even at Eskom, there's a photo of the two of them at a meeting at Eskom. Even recently, then in the media, it showed the former President Zuma, who is supposed to be now on medical parole. There was a photo with him together with Ms. Myeni at Sabaya Casino in Durban. So one can see that wherever there is various discussions, she's always with him. So she does play a key role, I believe.
That's interesting. Just quickly, why was it important again to close the route to Mumbai? I know that has to do with the Guptas.
Yes. So the reasoning given that it wasn't a revenue generating route, and it was loss making and therefore had to close. However, we found out much later, after the route was closed, that this was actually being pushed by the Guptas. And this was given by Mlisi Kigaba, who at the time was the Minister of Department of Enterprise, and he made that decision. The knock-on effect for SAA was that SAA had this route flying for many years from Johannesburg into India. From India, one could take connecting flights to the southern hemisphere. So you could get to Australia, to New Zealand, or subsequent islands like Indonesia, etc. Or you could fly north, further north into India and China and various other areas surrounding Pakistan and those sort of places. So it was a good route for those doing the Hajj for Muslims. It was a good route for those who were business people buying through China and India, the textiles because of cotton and silk. It was also a good trade route for other issues. So the aircraft was always full. It was a second knock-on effect that people coming from the Far East would fly into Johannesburg and then could get a flight from SAA who flew into Sao Paulo, into Brazil. And so they could get into the Southern Hemisphere from a different direction, which was cheaper. When we closed that route, suddenly one saw the impact that your revenue reduced completely because you didn't have that leverage of flying from one country, bringing people to our country and then taking them onto another continent. And again, it's always, they say, hindsight is one only realizes with hindsight what the problems are. And this is where SAA started losing extreme revenue. So for me, again, it apparently from Jet Airways, which is the Indian airline, that the Guptas had shareholding in that organization and they pushed for it.
So that's probably one example of nefarious agenda pushed by Dudu Myeni. Can you give us some more examples of a corrupt agenda pushed by her?
Yes, there are quite a few. So while I was still group treasurer at SAA, one of them was SAA had purchased aircraft with Airbus, and this was already in 2002, 2003. That was long before I even came. It was a transaction that was made. SAA then pays pre-delivery payments. It's like you and I purchasing a car. We have to put a deposit down to get that car. It's something similar where these deposits are paid on a regular basis for these aircraft that you're going to take delivery in the future. The future was 2014, 2015, when SAA was supposed to take delivery for these aircraft. By 2014, SAA was going through a cash crunch. They realized that there was no way they could have enough funds to still take delivery of the aircraft. And together, discussing with board what's the next process, and with a fleet committee, they decided that it's best they go to renegotiate with Airbus. The negotiations happened. The aircraft at the time was 20. It was reduced to 10 aircraft, and it was a more recent generation aircraft, and it would save SAA some funds that they would get some of the pre-delivery payments that they had accumulated paid back to SAA. So that it was a beneficial win-win for both Airbus and SAA. In that agreement was also that there was going to be a leasing organization, which Airbus was going to be. What Ms. Myeni did at the time was, it was discussed at board. Board approved it. From board, because we are Section Schedule 2 company, according to our Public Finance Management Act, we have to go to your ministry for approval, and SAA's ministry for approval was obviously National Treasury. National Treasury had given the approval for that. All SAA had to do now was to go and implement this approval. Ms. Myeni then went to try and change the board resolution, saying that, oh no, SAA is only taking 2 aircraft, the other 8 will be done through a leasing organization. And the leasing organization was still supposed to be decided, and it was going to be an African leasing company. The board then realized that this was something wrong, and they actually called it to meeting to say, you can't change an existing board meeting resolution when all the board members had fully agreed on it and it's signed and it's been approved by the ministry. She never came to the meeting. Shortly thereafter, these said directors all resigned, which was really sad because they had the history and they could have done something. They left, and the board members that stayed on was Miss Kwinana, Yake Kwinana, and Dr. John Tambi, and they remained and were easily coerced with Miss Myeni to agree on this. So that's when she wanted to manipulate it. By then, this was months later, of 2014 into 2015. By the time it came to 2015, those directors had left. The acting the CFO had left. The acting CEO was sent back to Mango, and she brought in an acting CEO, CFO, new people who also convinced them that this is the right way for SAA. So there she manipulated that we get an African leasing company, that and that SAA was going to get funding, obviously through an unsolicited deal with Nedbank. And Mr. Nene just threw it out because he said in the document it stated no currency risk, and there was currency risk. So on that basis, she tried to manipulate the whole aircraft transaction by bringing in a middleman like a leasing company in Africa. It's a way which we've seen the pattern through the whole Zondo Commission already, that the way Eskom's behaved, Transnet and others, you're bringing a middle consortium or a middleman as a transaction advisor, and that's how you siphon money out of the organization. So that was one of her corrupt deals that she brought in.
Incredible. It sounds like an absolute nightmare. But we've spoken to Paul O'Sullivan. He's a forensic investigator, and he went after Dudu Myeni, amongst others. And he says he was actually tortured by a general associated with Dudu Myeni. I think you also have a few examples of Dudu Myeni actually being a quite vindictive person. Can you give us some of those examples?
Yes, we had a senior pilot called John Harty, and he was actually head of the Pilots Association, the SAA Pilots Association at that time. And they wrote a letter of no confidence, saying we have no confidence in the chairperson of SAA. What happened thereafter, she went and charged him for sabotage. She laid a charge at the police station for sabotage. He had to defend himself. He had to leave his position because now when there's a charge against you, you obviously can't be still part of the Pilots Association. He had to leave it. He had to fight his case. It cost him hundreds of thousands to fight his case. He did win in the end, but the onus was on him to prove that there was no evidence of sabotage. So for me, that was totally, totally vindictive. There's another case whereby one of the then CFO, who was Wolf Meyer, he had resigned from SAA already. He had already applied for another position and was going to work there in Saudi Arabia for Saudi Airlines. And he was called for an interview with carte blanche. Having done the interview, she went to sue him for speaking out in public and holding him to the confidentiality contract, which he had resigned, so he's no longer liable to hold that, but she still went and sued him. Yeah, on another occasion, she actually went into an internet cafe to write and to report on whistleblower. It was a whistleblowing report on her own executives in SAA and made up trumped up charges against them. They then had to defend themselves. So for me, she's a very, very vindictive woman.
Yeah, that's so sad. And obviously she pursued all this with state money. She had the state money to pursue this.
Exactly.
So Cynthia, can you tell us What did you blow the whistle on, and what was the reception like? Did you receive death threats? Was it awkward? Can you tell us how did you blow the whistle on this entire situation?
Yeah. Thank you for this, Donald. So I was actually in my role as group treasurer. I blew the whistle on an irregular transaction with a transaction advisor who won the deal or the procurement deal just to read and provide overview on SA's portfolio of its loans, look at its leases of the aircraft, and look at how we can restructure the debt. So it was given transaction advisory capacity it had to give. Our then CFO, acting CFO, who was Pameza Nahansi, she wanted to change the scope. And I called a meeting to say, what's happening? We need to finalize this. We need to stop anything that's happening with the current process of our funding and start all over again, or just go to the banks. All the time, our recommendation was only to the banks because the banks are credit rated. And she said, no, board gave permission already that we can change the scope of this current transaction advisor who was chosen, BNP Capital, to source funding for SAA. And the fee was going to be equating to, with that, it was 225 million, with that, 256 million. Just a success fee to go and source funding. Now, sourcing of funds, since I started there at SAA, in Treasury, it was work we're doing. It's work my team does, the head of cash management, myself was the group treasurer, or the prior group treasurers before me. We sourced the funds. You sent an RFP out to the banks, you sourced the funds at no additional cost, but your salaries to get the work done. Obviously, there is a costing with the banks who give a margin that they charge for getting those funds to SAA. It's the same when you go and borrow money, you also get an additional fee that you have to pay. When I was called into a meeting separately by Ms. Nancy telling me that I'm asking too many questions, and that's why she called me in to say, this has already been decided by the board, I just have to sign it, the proposal, so it will go to the bid adjudication committee and they will approve it through that process. I obviously pushed back. I said, I'm not going to do this. And I tried to speak to the CFO, the CRO, the Chief Risk Officer. I went to speak to them, I went to report it to internal executive manager. And then then I took it to National Treasury, which if one looks at the Protected Disclosures Act, you got to go to a ministry, which I did go to. And still nothing happened. And based on that, I took it further then, which was, I started from May, June, July. I went to various channels. By July, the beginning of July, I took it to OUTA, which is an organization undoing tax abuse. So yes, so that's how I blew the whistle. And it was more on this transaction that was irregular and going against our policies and procedures.
And what was the reception like afterwards? Were you receiving death threats? What was that situation like?
So firstly, I got suspended. Yeah, that was the first reaction. Secondly, is your own staff don't talk to you. Your colleagues don't speak to you. You are shut out. And apparently an email went from the CFO stating I committed some misconduct. So obviously everyone's not going to be speaking to you. So the reception is very cold. It pushes you away from everybody. It isolates you. For me I felt I'd done the right thing and I was loyal to the organization. I was just doing my job. I didn't see that I did anything untoward for the organization. So that was really the reception. The end result was a long drawn out legal process, which cost me as well as besides the monetary side, it impacts your family, it impacts me physically, mentally. emotionally. And thereafter, though, I then left SAA, we separated. However, from a death threat perspective, from day one, I refused to take any calls of numbers that I did not know. And so there were many calls. I had no idea who was calling me, whether it was media or whether it was anyone trying to put any threats. I didn't take those calls. What I did notice, though, that I was being followed outside my house. There were cars watching my home, and I would check with our community policing forum because we all have one another's numbers. Is this a car that belongs to the community? And the community was saying, we don't know it. In my street, we all know one another's vehicles, and no one knew it. And so we started taking photos of these vehicles. And I would also just leave the house. The minute I saw a strange car, I would just drive away. I was followed, and many times I either went to, I was seeing the lawyers, or I was at my daughter's house, or I was at the church, or at the gym. That was my routine in those first 3 months. And they gave up afterwards because they probably thought I was in high risk because I didn't know anyone politically. So yeah, so death threats, I didn't receive any at that time. Thanks.
That sounds frightening. And I think we're definitely going to discuss this more when we get to the Citizens of Conscience Foundation. But just about the logistics of SAA, I've spoken to pilots who've lost their job due to affirmative action. Do you think affirmative action is destroying the airline? Or what do you see as the fundamental problems of SAA today?
Okay, SAA today, the new SAA, I feel that I don't know enough yet of how they want to go about it. But from just reading in the media, the first area I can talk about is the consortium that they want to combine the new SAA with, which is the Takatso consortium. And Takatso is broken up into two parts, which is the global aviation owned by Gideon Novik and his airline called Lyft. And then the other one is Harith. Harith, at present in my research, I found PIC owns 30% of Harith. Now, the government owns, at this point in time, 100% of SAA. And the government also owns 100% of PIC. Now, if PIC owns 30% of Harith, and Takatso eventually gets 51% of SAA, that still tells me that government is still the majority shareholder. So it's embedded. Exactly. So I see that as a conundrum for them, and I don't know how they're going to work that out. So that's the one part. The BE part and the affirmative action part is, it's unfortunate that they only want to limit it to people of color for the aircraft. The sad thing is there's very few people in the years, people of color, who have decided to become pilots. So you don't have enough. And the good record, or I should say excellent record, a flight record that SAA has held over its more than 80 years of existence, is that they had about 5 accidents, with aircraft accidents, and the rest has been really an excellent track record. One needs the experience of pilots. If one just recalls the pilot who landed the plane on the Hudson River some years back, I watched his interview. It was because of his experience he could make that decision and still save all those lives. So flying an aircraft takes years. We know even with driving, you can't just, your first couple of months of driving, even your first year, you most likely will have an accident, So it's the same with pilots. So my concern is just that they need to be worried about the safety aspect. And the way the BE was a good legislation in South Africa. It was there to correct the wrongs of the past. But the implementation is what is wrong. The implementation has swung to to only hiring people of color, but more from the African type race versus colored Indian. But I'm going to go with just people of color. But I would prefer if we looked at merit. It doesn't matter. We all South Africans. If we can start looking that we are South Africans and we start looking at quality and that we don't, and we take people with the qualifications that can do the job. At the moment, what I'm seeing in every sphere, not only at SAA, it's mediocrity. We're going for mediocrity. We're not going for quality. And hence, we can see the impact on every sort of area in South Africa, be it our health system, be it our infrastructure, be it our education. And SAA and Eskom are key factors that showing the demise of not choosing people with merit and people who can make a difference and the change that we want to see in South Africa.
Absolutely. And yeah, I believe the movie Sally demonstrates you need someone with experience at the helm of an aircraft in a situation like that. But do you believe the SAA can be turned around? Because it seems like a company like Ethiopian Airways has taken over many of the African routes. Do you think the situation can be reversed? What is your opinion of a company like Ethiopian Airways?
So while I was still at SAA, I normally kept my own research so that I was on top of issues. So I always looked at what the international airlines were doing and what the regional, which is Africa, airlines were doing, and then competition domestic. Ethiopian Airlines is already owned, 100% government owned, like SAA. They both are 100% owned. Up front, government did give Ethiopian Airlines funding to run it, and they said, you run it like a business. And they said, you report to us annually. Once your financials are completed, you come and report to us. There's been no interference with government in Ethiopian Airlines. The difference with SAA is that government is interfering. Yes, we fall under a ministry, which I agree, it has to be that way. But when decisions are made where you bring in board members directly, and it's not run like a business, it's run with government interference, government decision-making. So you get the type of board members that will probably fit the agenda of whatever government wants, rather than just saying, this is a business, we've given you the funding, now go and make it work. If you don't make it work, we will close the airline. And that hasn't happened over the years. Also, in Ethiopian Airlines, if you go and research them, they have their staff all having grown up in the airline. So you don't become a CEO or an executive manager if you have not spent at least minimum 10 years in the organization. Lufthansa works on a similar principle, that their top executives have come through the airline. They've grown, they've understand the fundamentals of how that airline works. SAA, we've had the history of CEOs have come from everywhere, all over the world and all over different industries. The executives themselves have come from different industries. So they can never just come in, make decisions and run with it. They have to first learn how the airline works. They have to learn its policies, its procedures. And that has an impact on the people underneath who say, we've already recommended, here's a solution. If we do this, this will happen. Those solutions were pushed away. Yet in the media, it always says it's management. Middle management are the ones that are the cause of the problems. The problems are actually in that top tier because they haven't got the experience. So the question you're asking, can SAA be turned around? Look, having spoken to pilots and various staff while I was there and even after, because I still kept in touch with some of the pilots, they believe that we can turn it around. I believe that if you have the right people in place, we can turn it around, because there's enough people that have worked long enough in the airline who have the passion, firstly, to turn it around, have the experience and the political will, you know, the desire to make it a functional, profit-making airline. What we do know, and research confirms this, that no airline makes huge profits. Your margins are very small, 2%, 3%, but it's having to really manage each of your cost centers so much that you can make the profit. So for me, I would recommend to government that while this country has so many other challenges, government should just get out of that space. They should focus on the health system right now, which is far more priority being in a pandemic. And they should allow perhaps a private enterprise to take over it 100%. So if Takatso wants to take over, my recommendation would be take it over 100% and show us you can make a profit of it. Find the right people in there, but don't leverage off government now when government has other major issues to focus on. So yes, I think government should just get out of that space.
So on that note, Cynthia, it seems like corruption is really, really the problem. And it's now 2021. Ramaphosa has been given a few years. I think there's been a recent poll where South Africans say corruption has actually gotten worse. Do you see light at the end of the tunnel? Do you see that state capture at corruption will be solved? Do you think corruption in SAA will eventually be solved?
Okay, so corruption in South Africa, would it be solved? No. Corruption is all over the world, firstly. We've seen it in Africa, and it's in Europe and in the States. And they just have different ways of managing it. So it's there, it's not going to be solved. We're going to need more citizens, active citizenry in South Africa to stop it. We as South Africans, we lulled, we leave it to government to sort out issues. And we've actually only realized with all the evidence that came out at Zondo, how deep and wide the extent of corruption has spread. So how do we solve it? By speaking out, by being more ethical, by not allowing anyone to go against the rules. You know, there's research shown, you know, if one looks at the bell curve, there will always be 10% of people who will do what's right, no matter what they're faced with. And then there's 10% who will do what's wrong, no matter how much coaching or guidance you give them or teaching, they will always do it wrong. Then there's the 80%, which is the bulk of citizens like you and me and everyone else. And we then look at, we can be swayed. If someone has enough force to show me this is what I need to do, or drive me, you'll get paid if you do this, or we will give you that, you know, and sway the person. So the 80% can easily be swayed to do the right thing or the wrong thing. And I feel that's where we got that 80% to start changing, to saying, you know what, if we want to make a difference, we each need to it starts with me, not with anyone else. Going on to SAA though, is I'm not so sure, because there were very good people who wanted to do the right thing. And you can, and there's a lot of evidence to attest to that. The one is, firstly, how our pilots flew the aircraft from a safety perspective. The second part is how the airline, the aircraft was maintained. We had a high quality maintenance schedule, as that Lufthansa even took pride with the SA technical team that used to maintain aircraft. So, and I don't know how that is now because I'm not that close to SAA anymore. We also had a good service. We won many awards, and I don't know if that can be continued at present. So I don't think I know enough to talk about the future about SAA, but there was evidence that SAA was a good airline, enough to turn it around. And if it just had enough equity in it and managed it in really a streamlined way, it could have been turned around. But for corruption globally and for South Africa, I think it's companies now, to business leaders, to stand up against anything, to help their own staff, because it works in tandem. You know, there's corrupt business leaders and corrupt staff. And if you allow it to happen, it's a symbiotic effect. But if everyone as leaders become ethical leaders and we as citizens become ethical citizens, we can turn it around. It cannot happen overnight, I agree, but we can slowly walk that path to changing the way and the trajectory of South Africa.
Absolutely. That's very inspiring. So I know you have co-founded an organization, the Citizens of Conscience Foundation. Can you tell us about this organization? What does it strike to solve?
So after my experience as a whistleblower and after giving evidence at the Zondo Commission, which was in 2019, I started reaching out to quite a few whistleblowers, and we started a support group. We would chat about our stories and share stories, and where anyone was struggling with finding the right lawyer, we would find a lawyer who could assist them. If someone was struggling from a mental health perspective, we would, and because they didn't have the funding or medical aid, we would look at who was prepared to give assistance on a pro bono basis to the person. We were looking at how can we assist them financially. Obviously, we couldn't help with people losing their homes or their cars, but helped in a small way just to at least buy food or put petrol in the car. So just small little ways we were finding just to help one another. And that seemed to stabilize the whistleblowers to an extent. And we discussed that we should rather find a company that we can build this on a bigger basis. So this was 2019 into 2020. We decided to register a company called Citizens of Conscience. At the time, we were 5 whistleblowers who were the directors of that organization. And the plan really and the intention is to support whistleblowers on a bigger scale. So part of our intention now going forward, and then we hit COVID. So with the COVID, it was really difficult to do anything, and we were just trying to support one another on a small scale. But now, a year down the line, our intention is to actually tackle the banks. I've been writing in my personal capacity to the banks to help whistleblowers, but they haven't been forthcoming. And now we're going to take it as an organization to say to the banks, you're going to have to forgive the debt. You're going to have to write off the debt, because up still now, it's even worse after COVID that the whistleblowers still cannot find jobs. We were all doing smaller things. I was teaching yoga daily at schools and at the gyms. With COVID, it had to be reduced. Others who ran small coffee shops or small businesses also had to close during COVID. So the impact was really huge on us. And now we cannot upkeep the debt. And this is what we want to do. The other thing is we're looking at seeking funding for the whistleblowers, so we can pay off the cars or the houses. Firstly, we're going to tackle the banks can just alleviate that debt. And I know it's been done before, because in a recent book published by one of the whistleblowers, I picked it up that their debts were written off. And so I know the banks can do it. So that's why I now have a new focus for that. And then it's to secure funding from sponsorship for whistleblowers. I do not want to go the route of crowdfunding, because it's not a once-off case. It's an ongoing thing. So I'm looking for a far bigger process whereby companies who are penalized for doing wrongdoing, that penalty, that fee, should rather go to a whistleblowing fund. And that can sustain the whistleblowing fund. It gives them dignity. It gives them the purpose to go on. They could use part of the money to open their own business and then become self-sufficient. So that's the intention that I'm looking at doing for whistleblowers. Thank you.
So it sounds like a very noble cause, and I wish you all the luck. But Cynthia, I see our time is running up. This has been a very fascinating conversation. I want to give you one last opportunity to add, plug, or say anything that you want to.
Okay, so yeah, I'd like to take the opportunity just to encourage every citizen of South Africa that we, in the words of Mahatma Gandhi, we need to be the change that we wish to see in this country. We need to be the people that if we notice anything wrong, we need to speak up and stand up. I do fully understand the repercussions that the whistleblowers have suffered, and I do not wish that on anyone. But what I am promoting is that when we stand together, we're able to change the legislation so that it does work for whistleblowers. And if there's more of us speaking up, it should become the norm rather than the outlier. And that we then standing together can make that difference for South Africa. Too many times, especially in our political parties, we are divided through racial lines, through religious lines, through culture lines. And that, for me, we forget that we are South Africans. We forget that we have such a wide diversity. And I am probably from 1652, that makes it almost 400 years generation by the time I'm born. I have many areas of different blood, ancestors' blood flowing through my veins. So that makes me unique. And it makes every South African unique. So what I'd like to say is, let's embrace that diversity. Let's use that diversity to change South Africa the way we want it to be, and leave a legacy for our children and our grandchildren, that South Africa can be a corrupt-free, highly ethical and moral country. Thank you.
Yeah, and who could disagree with that? But Cynthia, thank you so much. I believe if more people had your attitude, we would not have all the problems in South Africa today. But to our loyal viewers, you've most definitely liked the content if you made it this far, so please consider sharing this video, liking it, and subscribing to our YouTube channel. My name is Donald, and you've been watching WorldView.